This is willpower.
Hello, hello. It's not your first rodeo. I'm here with Nick Gibson. Welcome to the show.
Hey, welcome everyone that's listening. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you in the hot seat tonight to ask questions and lean in a way that feels emotionally regulated and opening to the audience. First, I gave you a little intro. I recorded it right before we jumped on and told everyone all about your star-studded background, really leaning into health and well-being and founding your own nonprofit as the very first thing. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, that you did at a young age. And then turns out youngest Commonwealth Mental Health Commissioner in Australia. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. That was a crazy time.
Yeah. And so just really continuing to forge a path. And even when I met you in Colorado, can just feel from your energy how, grounded and connected you not only are within your own self, but when you are around other people, that you are continuing to sort of let that flow. So super honored to have you here and to talk about all of the pieces of Nick Gibson and this technology that you're launching. I think, I wanted to start off with you giving a little bit of a nod into your past. I know you've written books and your philosophies, how they sort of were the groundscape for and the fuel for the company that you founded, which is Love Out Loud, and now this InTruth technology. Maybe just giving a little insight on that.
It's a really big, where I came from is a really big catalyst for what I'm building, and maybe more importantly than what I'm building, why I'm building it, and the key problem that we're really trying to solve. Because I'm a big fan of first principles thinking, and I think my journey has kind of reflected that in that the problem I was trying to solve with my nonprofit, which was my first company, is actually the same problem that I'm trying to solve with InTruth Technologies. But over the years, I think just iterating and looking at how we can make that solution more accessible, more scalable, more effective. Thinking that way as an entrepreneur, I think has gifts that aren't talked about enough, that kind of take you into different areas of entrepreneurship. I never would have thought that I would have ended up in tech, starting out actually in the very beginning as a performer, actually. It just seems like an absolute kind of swing in the opposite direction. But that's kind of been the path, and there has been a method to that. But in my early years, actually, as an aspiring performer, I went to a performing arts school instead of a regular high school. Well, no way.
Same.
Amazing. Yeah. So you sort of understand that. For me, that was a real introduction into, I think, very kind of philosophical way of understanding life. I majored in Meisner, which is a derivative of method acting, and the principles that we were brought into. And for me, I was, still very young, 14 years old, was really about looking at life beyond the identity and really sort of analyzing identity and how to understand who we are. Underneath that was very foundational, I think, in how I went on to look at the problem I'm trying to solve in the space of mental and emotional health. Which is very unconventional and actually kind of in conflict with a lot of mainstream ways of tackling that problem. So that was a very formative background. And the style of the theater, our director used to say, this is about being 100% yourself under the given imaginary circumstances. So if there was ever a situation where we would resist who we would otherwise be in those circumstances, the training was to basically break down the ego enough to be able to be more fluid. And for me, the impact that had on me was this very deep compassion, realizing that even people that act in volatile ways or extreme ways, actually, in one way or another, this is actually just love trying to express itself in dysregulated ways. And so what needs to happen in order to bring some of these behaviors that have very dire impacts on our world into regulation. And when I now pitch InTruth, I'll usually open with, we're solving the problem behind all problems. And I really believe that, because if we had emotionally regulated leaders, and people within our major systems that knew how to regulate themselves, then there would be a coherence that would naturally start to emerge. And that doesn't come from agreeing with each other. It actually comes with developing a comfortability with difference. Then maybe we can touch on that a little bit. But that's really where the original, I guess, thoughts and contemplations for me came from. I actually later went on to struggle with an eating disorder over those years at the Performing Arts School, which was also very pivotal in my journey. I think because I got to see very visibly the way people react to their perception of, mental health challenges and vulnerability. And unlike maybe someone that has gone through depression or anxiety and maybe experienced more invisible scars, I was confronted because I was very visibly not well. I got to see the way people react to that. And in the context of what I was studying as well, I think it kind of catalyzed me to start asking questions like, well, if people can't be open and feel kind of secure and safe around a 16-year-old that's going through, something like an eating disorder, and that's very hard for people to humanize, what other difficult conversations are we not having? And it put something, I think, into a perspective that was hard for me to let go of. I wanted to solve that problem because I could see that even people that loved me very much, like friends, family, teachers, they just so struggled because of whatever my condition brought up for them to be present, which obviously makes healing that much harder both ways. And I could see the volatility. It gave me that lens, I think, to see a lot of the conflicts we see globally, even geopolitically. A lot of it is coming down to the same thing. One person or a group of people have a series of beliefs and the other side have a different series of beliefs. And the vulnerability that's required to open yourself up and not make it about being right, but actually about understanding, is a level of emotional development that I don't see that often in our world. And I wanted to solve that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very profound, the things that you're sharing about this uncomfortability with difference. And I think that navigation, and even just, let's go back 10,000 feet just a bit, which is, even before I pressed record, I was saying, you're navigating these things in the space of an entrepreneur who's launching a very big business, and sharing some of the things that I continue to go through on a day-to-day basis, and how also through the lens of working with other people, whether they be on our team or in the world, that we come up against. Even you're talking, you mentioned about like there's two groups and they have two very different opinions and they have to come together to be vulnerable to sort of stand in that together, right? And reflect upon each other. And that can be, hate to use the word triggering, but it can be, really upregulating for people. And so when I see, just even in the work landscape, right, taking it out of the realm of sort of this geopolitical thought process, and I look in the work realm, where like looking and navigating and working with people, and then in our personal worlds, where stepping in with each other, right? My mom is calling me and saying XYZ, I think you should be doing this, this, and this. And it's all really through the lens of what my mother's awareness is, right? And so how we ride on this beautiful carousel together of like ups and downs and joys and reflections of each other is the piece that feels so mammoth to try to calm the carousel down, so everybody's like has the horse that they want and is just like chilling, and or can wave from the up above and be like, tomorrow you get this horse, or whatever weird analogy I'm making. But that, to me, the profound nature of the reflection in the differences and how people are going to a place, like, it's the age old adage of it's the space in between the stimulus and the response for how we behave around each other. And I want to kind of like get some clarity on your thought process on like how, when we open that playing field, when we navigate differences that create uncomfortability, perhaps some of the solutions that you're creating, but also what's your notion around, just some best practices to think of around self-awareness, around capacity, around ability, around the ability to stand in the presence of differentiation and feel okay. Because it's such a thing that we see, right, over and over and over again. I love that you talked about Meisner. So like But like over and over and over again, it's the thing that we see.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the how often in the practice of Meisner, like just the discomfort of that repetition throws you as a performer, and the best performers are the ones that can kind of withstand that. What one of the practices my director got me to do one time was to stand up in front of the cast and basically do a non-performance. So in like don't deflect in any way, and just to let people see you. And it's just honestly the hardest thing to do. to just allow yourself to not feel any impulse, to want to be performative or deflect from being seen. But that's a whole other.
The whole other thing. It reminds me of like the exercise we would do in at my performing arts high school was like private moments where you'd like you go and you just set up something that would be likened to your bedroom or whatever it is, and then you just hang out in it while people watch you, and you're like, well, I want to do something, I want to shine, and then it's like, nope, your job is to go and fill the vase with water, and
That's so much more compelling, actually.
Yes.
This is what that discipline taught me. And I am going to tie it into the question that you're asking, right? And it is a discipline because everything in our world is trying to take us away from ourselves all the time, every direction you look. So it's a discipline to stay with yourself. And I think that the way that translates, because that has very much been my lifelong discipline. And I also went through an experience where I deeply abandoned myself through starving myself. So since then, my healing has been to not abandon myself. And I feel that perhaps when people reflect, you seem very regulated or, whatever the choice of word, confident. It's more so just the presence I've cultivated in myself, that there's a security that I have that I've worked for. Like it wasn't something that I just had. And I think that that's on many, many levels and layers of life that can be developed. It's not just the mental layer of telling yourself the right things. It's also understanding your values and ensuring that you're living a life that's actually aligned to those values. I think that if there's an incongruence in your integrity in those ways, for example, one of my highest values is freedom, the other is compassion. I would not have the presence that I have if I was, working a 9-to-5 job. That's obviously a kind of an extreme example, but maybe interesting for your listeners to contemplate that you can be doing all of the self-development, in the world, all the therapy in the world, but if you still choose to live a life that's not congruent, which obviously takes courage, that you've got to trust, right? That if there's a flow of energy, if the flow of energy is ever going to come through you, it's going to best come through you when there's an alignment, when there's no kind of blocks or chinks in the chain of energy. And that's definitely how I see life. And to sort of elaborate on that more broadly, when you live that way, people's differences don't threaten you. That the discomfort with someone's difference, or the discomfort with a sort of level of vulnerability or emotional expression that's maybe uncomfortable, that comes down to aspects of yourself that you've disowned, aspects of yourself that you don't, if someone else that you're judging is throwing you off, that says a lot more about you than it does about them, right? And it's often not the way that that's understood or analyzed, because we do have a very kind of superficial and judgmental society where we'll also use social validation. Like if there's, I don't know, the loser at school, right? Everyone will gang up on that loser, and the loser thinks that, well, they're just objectively a loser. But actually, maybe their willingness to sit on their own at lunchtime is so triggering to the popular kids because that's something that they could never, ever do. That their only way to retaliate is to bully that kid. But really what they're expressing is a disownership and a rejection of the aspect of themselves that is reflected, which, that's what acting taught me. That's what that discipline taught me, was to come to bring those pieces back to me. And I guess in some ways it's quite a spiritual outlook on life, because I'm taking the premise and the position that every person I meet, everything I experience is a reflection of me. And to find greater wholeness and greater emotional stability and ultimately love, love in all moments and not choose fear. It's accepting that as the self and not choosing to reject it.
Yeah. Yeah, beautifully put. And then as you navigate all of this philosophy and ability into the company Love Out Loud, and then the underpinnings of bringing in the ideation and innovation of the InTruth software, how do you see that sort of the pieces of the puzzle fitting together with getting people to get a greater understanding of where they sit in their emotionality? Because the other thing that came to mind, and I know when you were speaking, is just we use this term regulation a lot. And I've been talking about this a lot with clients and people in my mentorship group and whatnot, because especially in the nervous system breath and cold landscape, it's like regulation, regulation, regulation. And people will quite often flip-flop that out for calm. Like, you just need to calm down. And it's really not what it's all about, right? It's like, I use this silly analogy of, you're standing on the curb and you're like looking at a beautiful tree and you're even and you're easy and you're in a parasympathetic state. And then there's a Mack truck coming down the highway and there's a baby crawling across the road carrying its little doll. And you have to be able to upregulate yourself to enact running across, saving the baby, letting the truck go by, getting to the other curb and holding the baby and being like, hey, we're good, right? And that's a really regulated nervous system, is that the highs and the lows in the necessary moments can really work. So I just want to unpack that a little bit, because I think there's this notion of regulation as being like, well, I'm gonna look at my neurofeedback, my biofeedback device, and I'm gonna be like, how do I get regulated? How do I get regulated? And I think maybe you could speak a little bit more to that in the answer to the overall question around how InTruth kind of comes to the table to support this need.
There's a lot of questions in one question, so let's kind of go through it maybe one by one. Let's address, because I think this is an important point, the difference between true emotional regulation and this idea that, someone who's regulated would just be flatline all the time. And that's absolutely not true. Our resilient nervous system is a nervous system that can go to any extremity and not experience a refractory period. So to be able to fully feel maybe really, socially taboo kind of emotions like rage or euphoria or pleasure, like even pleasure, people have in our culture a really difficult time actually because of all of the beliefs, that we've been indoctrinated into, actually letting go and experiencing those more intense emotions. But a healthy nervous system is able to go to those places and not get stuck there, right? Children are the best at this. Like you see a 2-year-old have a tantrum, right? Even my 6-year-old niece, like it's just so many emotions in a minute, and she's not holding on to any of those emotions. Her nervous system is so healthy and agile in those ways. Whereas like as an adult, we have often a lot of these traumas because the nervous system, and I'm sure your audience, I'm kind of, they're probably more intelligent when it comes to the nervous system because of all the work that you do. But for anyone that has never sort of understood this, the nervous system has a basic language, which is threat or safety. And as you get older, that there's a whole threat detection system
there's an argument or
that
a
has
theory
started
to be
to
made,
see things that you won't even
really
realize as a
is
prospective threat. And what starts to happen is the nervous system
it's the nervous system
contracts.
before the thoughts.
And this
right?
has
sometimes it's even the
profound
breath,
impact
then the
on
nervous
the
system,
way
then
that we
the thoughts,
emote and the way that we
perhaps,
experience
whatever order it is, every
emotionally.
millisecond, tracking.
So being able to work through those things,
part of the reason that the technology can help with
a truly regulated
how
nervous
people are
system is a nervous
understanding how they
system that
express,
knows
because there
how
is a
to
reaction
reclaim a
time that
sense
we
of
can't even
safety
fathom.
in all situations. Of course, if you're truly in danger, that's a different story. But the way in the modern world, because of overstimulation as well, with the amount of stimulus that we're experiencing all the time, you will experience threat, even because you hear your phone ping 3 rooms away. Like, you go into like a hypervigilant, I have to do something right now. Imagine how much stress that is that accumulates, over your day, week, month, year, decade. So yeah, to be regulated is to not go into that threat response consistently and to be able to feel through whatever you're feeling. And obviously that then connects you more to a deeper sense of compassion. We lose compassion for ourselves or for another person when we need to cut off in order to sort of survive. We're not able to actually stay within our intuitive or emotional or empathetic experience. And I think that emotion's driving 80% of our decisions, right? So if we want to change the world, we have to come back to a healthier relationship with our own emotionality. Otherwise, we just don't feel, we're making these decisions without any feeling. And it's kind of like, mass psychopathy. It's a very kind of extreme way of looking at it, but in a way, that's kind of what it is. And it's because many of us just are in a state of survival all the time, and we're not able to kind of reach beyond that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. So the way in neuroscience it's understood is stimulus, and then every 200 milliseconds we emote. So that's precognizant. It's pre-mind. Then by the time someone asks, "Hey, how are you feeling?" and you say, "I'm feeling happy," or whatever the answer is, it's actually an aggregation of about 50 emotions. And the brain, the subjectivity kicks in because the brain is trying to simplify a complex world. It's what our brain is doing with everything, but especially our emotions, because they're so complex, and that it's never one thing, that you're processing. It could be 50 different emotional expressions that the brain is trying to come up with one word to explain. And that's a feeling, which is actually different to emotion. And I think that culturally we use these things interchangeably. And that's something that, I feel is part of my team's work to re-educate. Because I've had this question my whole career, right? Why don't we have a more emotionally intelligent world? And I can now very clearly see through the work we've done with InTruth and the research that we've done through InTruth, it's no wonder because we don't even have a language that can touch what emotion
just from the
is.
little
We don't
times that I've been
understand what
playing with
emotion
it and
is
using it
as a
and
world,
figuring it out,
and yet it's driving so much of what we do and how we behave. So
almost
it's
like a
trying to
rewiring
speak
of our
English,
understanding
and
of
the
ourselves
only
or our
language is
awareness.
Chinese. We don't have an appropriate
because
language.
there's a litany
that
of other things
touches
around that are like inputting all
the
the time,
emotional layers
including
of
everyone
us.
else's
And
opinion on what
words
your feelings and
actually
emotion and mood
aren't
and state
suffice
are.
either, because
that
it's
that recalibration, let's call
our
it,
mind can't
of
catch
you being
up,
able
and
to see the
then
data
when the
feels like
feeling isn't processed, it becomes a mood, and when
it
the
would give
mood's
people an
not
exhale,
processed, it becomes a
right?
state. So
And
when I
I think
give keynote
this is
talks,
also like therein also
I
lies the
often
controversy, right?
speak
Is
to
like,
that, and I circle
what is it
state,
picking up and how is it
and I talk about the
aggregating
state of the
what my
world
body is saying,
and
and
how
like,
we're currently
there's a
going about
belief
trying
that
to
has to
change the
be
state of the
within
world, which
this. And
is,
I just
all about
let's also
for many
just
intelligent
at
people
a
in the
very
world,
baseline
big system
level,
change.
just
But
unpack
what I try
exactly
to
how
highlight
InTruth
is
works, like
actually
what
the
it is,
state of
how
the
it works,
world,
and like the
is
layers
an
of the
accumulation of the state of the
biofeedback devices and
individual,
whatnot,
and the
so
state of
people
the
kind of
individual
understand.
begins right at that 200 millisecond emotional response. And that's where the intervention has to happen if we ever want to see, mass global change. But there's never been a system or a technology that can touch it at scale. And so that's what InTruth is doing. And when you can see some of the aggregated data, like we had a guy who I selected actually from the audience in one of my talks, which was awesome, to use InTruth for a few weeks. And his kind of response to his data was, it's like being able to see my soul.
Fuck yeah.
Which is like, wow, it's even deeper than, what I kind of felt InTruth could touch. But I sort of understand it because it's driving so much of what you do and why you do it. It is such an intimate view of a person. Like now when I look at aggregated data sets of some of the people testing InTruth, it gives you pretty much to an 85% accuracy visibility over how that person's going to behave.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just from the little times that I've been playing with it and using it and figuring it out, it feels to me like almost like a rewiring of our understanding of ourselves or our awareness,
Yeah.
because there's a litany of other things around that are like inputting all the time, including everyone else's opinion on what your feelings and emotion and mood and state are. And that recalibration, let's call it, of you being able to see the data feels like it would give people an exhale, right? And I think this is also like therein also lies the controversy, right? Is like, what is it picking up and how is it aggregating what my body is saying? And like, there's a belief that has to be within this. And I just, let's also just, at a very baseline level, just unpack exactly how InTruth works, like what it is, how it works, and like the layers of the biofeedback devices and whatnot, so people kind of understand.
Yeah. So if I'm going too technical, just to sort of like pause me and I can try to kind of simplify. But in technical terms, simplified technical terms, consumer grade wearables all pretty much use what's called a PPG sensor. So the sensor in an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch or a Whoop or a Garmin is all PPG. So when you're tracking things like heart rate variability, that is a post-processed function of the raw data from PPG, which is called IBI data. Interbeat interval is what it stands for. So there's actually no universal way of calculating heart rate variability, which I think is interesting. Every company that gives you a HRV score, they have a different way basically of calculating the HRV. And if you've used multiple devices, you'll see that because your score is usually different. So that's an example of how companies have taken raw IBI data and structured it into something like HRV as a comparison to what we've done. We've taken the raw IBI data and we process it through a machine learning model, which is our proprietary kind of IP. We've trained it off a bunch of clinical data sets. And we've basically trained the IBI data to identify what's called valence and arousal, which is the core to emotion. So if there's any nerds that want to kind of look deeper into that, if you Google the circumplex model of emotion, it'll come up with a XY graph. And the x-axis is the valence and the y-axis is the arousal. And there'll be a bunch of different emotions that are inputted in the graph in the different, photos you'll find on Google Images. What's amazing about this, though, is there's no universal agreement around the circumplex model. So no company or researcher has been able to map the circumplex model at scale enough, because there's never been a technology like ours, right? That, before InTruth, it's kind of been EEG in clinical environments, which is like a full almost MRI setup. Like you can't put millions of people.
And time consuming and everything. Yeah.
Right. So people have used EEG to map against the circumplex model, but never at scale. So if you look at the InTruth user interface, it'll probably make more sense to you now, because you'll see that the InTruth interface is the circumplex model of emotion. And basically our ML is mapping where you'll sit on that circumplex model of emotion, and then it's giving you the objective data point. And then what we'll obviously aim to do as our user base grows is we're turning some of the feature sets into more like an generative AI coach, where it'll start to meta tag all of your data in the back. So we can use things in a passive data collection sense, like geolocation or calendar integration, but then even more sophisticated features, which could be like, hey, you just had a podcast with Nick. You were feeling X, Y, and Z, tell me about that. And you'll reflect. So 10 seconds or however long, and then it's meta tagging that data. So say in 6 months' time, you want to know how we're going. You might say, hey, InTruth, can you go and tag all the time that I've spent, chatting with Nick or hanging out or doing something InTruth related? Tell me my emotional patterns as it relates to that relationship in my life, or tag everything correlated to my health and wellness and give me a general overview of my emotional patterns in that area of life. So you can start to prompt it in this really specific, personalized way. We're not here to tell you what the intervention should be. It's more, we're here to be like a chat GPT for your subconscious mind that can bring a lot of these correlations into the forefront of your awareness so that you can make more informed decisions. Because it could be like, you're experiencing a conflict with someone you love, you could ask in truth, when did this conflict first arise for me? This emotional pattern that I'm experiencing with my mom, when did this first arise? And in truth can look through your data and sort of calculate to the best of its ability, how that first manifested, why it manifested, even if it's maybe not related to the things that you think it's related to. So you can see how the data starts to become really dynamic. But what we're also doing in those feature sets is we're going to start to pick up the percentage of people that say that intersection in the XY axis is called happiness, and who places happiness maybe in a different section of the graph. So
Yeah.
I believe it's going to start to eliminate these incongruencies and these areas of miscommunication where you say happiness and I say happiness, and we have this general assumption that we mean the same thing. And I think it creates a lot of pain that we see in our lives because we have the pursuit of these things, but none of us can even define what these things are. So we're chasing these ideas of success, believing they're going to make us happy, but we can't even define what happiness is. Or
it's our story. We're like using the story to define it. And the story is just the story. That's the future of the past.
Yeah, exactly. So the meaning we make is all kind of distorted. So it's very interesting kind of where this can go, not just from a product perspective, but from a research perspective. I believe it's going to bring us closer to bridging our emotional experience as humanity, which I think is foundational to empathy. Rather than just saying to the world, you need to be more empathetic and compassionate, we need to actually look at, which a lot of Eastern philosophies teach, right? That compassion is a skill, is a discipline, and it's not a new concept, but there's never been a way of solving this at scale in the context of our modern Western world.
Yeah, and as you play with the scale of this growing, is there, because you say you've based your machine learning off of these models, and then is it like an ability? I think back to like when Viome launched, and it was like the sample set was so small that people were just getting crazy results. But like Viome could then use an anonymized version of everybody's stool samples in this case to say what's going on across people's gut health. And as they got to 1 million users, right, that changed substantially. Is there a differential with InTruth in that? Will it kind of stick with the original model, or will it grow and learn from anonymized data or things that people are, because it's strapped on to us as humans?
Definitely on the subjective level, like on the subjective level of what we name emotions as, I think that's going to be really illuminating. Post like 1 million or 10 million users, you're going to see so many patterns, cultural differences, where major miscommunications around particular emotion, like, think about the expression a Russian has of happiness versus like a Brazilian. It's like from the outset, just so opposite, right? But maybe, it's closer than we think, or maybe it's really far away. And, we don't have a way of cross-referencing any of that right now. So I think on a subjective level, that's really interesting.
I love that mention because I went and spoke in Finland this year. And I don't know if you've been around a lot of Finns, but it was like someone came up to me after my talk. It's a kind of a tough audience, not hyper emotional at you. And someone came up to me after and was like, "That was the best talk I've seen in quite some time."
Yeah.
And I was like,
thanks.
Nobody could see my face if you're just listening, but it was like deadpan. And I was like, okay, that's excitement. That's excitement for the Finns. I win. I guess I win. Like, that was great. Good feedback.
Yeah.
So yeah, that can help. I think that will help so much in the landscape of understanding and communication in general, right? Across, like you say, cross-culturally. So what I'm hearing you say is that it's more of a like bio-individual data tracking that's showcasing inside the software, the InTruth software on your phone, the interface. And then there's like larger sets of data that might be, like you said, subjective or geographical that can be captured, so that there's this like interesting dance. And I know you've spoken about this a bit recently on some podcasts, but an interesting dance with the, hey, I'm bought in on the InTruth and it's teaching me things, but where does my privacy start and my data end? So can you speak to that a little bit in this world of, I'm fascinated by all the things that are going with AI, and I think there's so many positives, but it's also like everybody's eating AI for lunch, breakfast, and dinner right now. And so just speaking to that to assuage some feelings in the audience.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good question. And just to close the loop on your last question too. So there will also be things that we learn from an objective standpoint in our machine learning. But one of the ways that we've trained the ML is actually off quite a substantial EEG data set of valence and arousal. So we're seeing the patterns and correlations there already. But as our user base grows and we can see their objective data, there will be adaptive sort of changes in the ML, no doubt, because we're tracking right now at an 83.5% accuracy, which is the same as EEG in a controlled environment. And that's the most accurate. So, it's very possible that because of the scale we have the potential for, that we're actually going to move into a level of kind of accuracy that hasn't existed before for emotion tracking, which is, amazing. So that's also very interesting for anyone that works in the space that maybe listens to your podcast. To data privacy, yeah, I mean, it can be a really conflated conversation.
You're like, not this question again.
No, it's a very important question. I want to start by kind of making listeners aware of where we currently sit in terms of health data, right? Because an objection that I get often is, well, startups aren't going to know how to keep our data safe. But let's put this into context of who currently owns your health data. So your health data right now is not owned by you, whether you're an Australian or an American or a Brit, whatever. Most countries, the government owns your health data. And this is very obvious in even your consumer experience, i.e. you go and get a blood test, you don't get those blood test results. Yeah, you have to go to your doctor and you ask your doctor for permission to access your blood results. This is starting to be disrupted because there are third-party vendors where you can order your blood test, right? And then they send you, and this is amazing. This is true data sovereignty. But that is not, I have argued time and time again with my general practitioner, my physician, give me my reverse T3 and T4. No, we won't test it. I will pay you to test it. No, we're not going to test it.
Test it.
Because your TSH is normal. But I'm like, I know that I have low reverse T3. I've seen it in my blood results a year ago. I want to test. I want to see if it's improved. Oh, we don't do that. So I give these examples because it's like I get so many people being like, oh, there's, data is terrifying in the hands of startups. Let's look at who currently owns your health data and the backdoors, which is not talked about enough, that health insurers have into governments that own your health data and are spilling your health data. And we've seen many versions of this, right? Like life insurance policies became substantially more costly for people, through the, I want to be careful with what I say, but through the pandemic, depending on how that went for you, your life insurance, if you go and take out a policy, is going to cost more because the insurers have access to that data. And they're not meant to have access to that data, but they do have access to that data. So this is the current foundation, and that data is being weaponized against you in all different ways that you might never know. Maybe you're a partner in a law firm and the firm want to understand what your mental health history is. And, there's ways if they really want to go down that track to figure out, if you've ever had a suicide attempt or you have some level of emotional instability. And so we don't want that, right? We want a world where you own your health data and it's turned around. You go to the doctor and the doctor says, can I have permission to access your health data? My ultimate vision for this is that we have some type of digital encrypted wallet, which is localized, kind of like a crypto wallet, that you store your health data, your biometric data, because it is highly, highly, highly valuable data. And I want to preface this and say we're still a young company. We haven't yet built this infrastructure, but we will. And the way that we currently protect data is through segmentation. So your pre-processed data, your identification data, and your post-processed data all sit in different servers. So if one of our servers is hacked, it's very hard to make any meaning out of that data. It's just either raw data or your name with no data. So that's kind of how we're protecting the data right now. But I want InTruth to be on the forefront, not just of data privacy, but true data sovereignty. Because I believe the more and more data that we capture, the more it paints a picture of exactly, who you are and how you behave. So you don't want governments knowing that. You don't want big corporations that are trying to sell you things. You don't want those companies to know that. And this is part of this problem is going to be solved through the right founders and the right teams and the right investors coming together to create these innovative alternatives. Part of it's going to be consumer-driven decision-making. And so I can't be clear enough here. Choosing companies like InTruth, you might, for a period of time, have to sacrifice Apple-level consumer experience. We don't have 1,000 Genius bars yet, around the world. But if you go with a company like us, and we have the support of a community and a movement of people, and not just us, but other companies that share a similar future vision for data sovereignty, and you empower us to grow to those levels, we are the only ones, in my opinion, that can secure data and actually create data sovereignty. I mean, one of the segments that was aired on national TV in Australia the other week, that they got an expert to come and comment, and he said, well, big companies can't protect data, so what chance do startups have? And like, I understand what he's trying to say, because he's like, well, if all the infrastructure of a big company can't protect data, how can a startup? But he's missing the point completely. And the point is that these bigger institutional companies have already committed to their data infrastructure. Startups like us can be agile, and we can actually design with sovereignty in mind. So it's not that, like, yes, Amazon has more resources than us right now, but Amazon isn't going to turn around tomorrow and say, actually, we're going to be fully decentralized. Scrap everything that we've built, and we're going to build in a decentralized way. Like, it's just not going to happen. They've chosen that path. But the next generation of companies, especially in AI and machine learning, there's an opportunity for that to be truly decentralized. But I believe that has to be kind of a 360 level of support. It's got to be the right companies that are willing to listen to the consumer willing to take a risk on new companies, and the right investors with the right money who aren't going to kind of bully the CEO into submission and selling their data to the wrong places and the wrong people. All of that has to come together in an ecosystem for this to work.
And this is a bit of a business question, and so I want to just, take it lightly, but I just want to say, are you coming up against that in the VC world as you're navigating, growing this brand and consumer experience, as well as raising capital, that you're like, oh, like, it's not Marlboro, but somebody's showing up and you're like, oh, this is like a good, but like not a great, and feeling it that it has to, in an interesting position as you're growing a company, right? Because I imagine, especially as I'm sure, it's challenging in the beginning, and especially as you've gotten more spotlight on you, that people are coming into the fold, and then you have to kind of be able to, like, are you making that, you got to make them wear InTruth for a few weeks before you figure out what's going on with them, or what?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, that is basically it, because obviously a lot of them want to try the product. And so the data is quite telling, like an example, someone interested in investing was using InTruth, and his model was quite interesting because on the outset, there was kind of high levels of sort of low stress, positive energy, but had these outbursts actually of rage, and there was no continuum or somewhere on the graph that would look something like rage, and they were fractured. So it kind of showed in his temperament that he's probably going to go from 0 to hero, and when he's under stress, and all of his stress was actually in the high negatives. There was no stress. So there's some very clear kind of temperament patterns that started to come from that. And, I'm never going to make a conclusive decision on that because I believe in development, but it's definitely an interesting talking point to be able to sort of turn the power dynamic around and say, hey, like, we want a team of people that are
like, let me show you your chart here and talk about what happened on Thursday.
Yeah. So that's been really interesting. I'll also say we do have some venture on our cap table, but mostly actually our cap table's filled with high net worth individuals, and more recently a non-dilutive grant from a very aligned family office. So we've kind of been unconventional in many ways. Like, we haven't gone the traditional venture path, and that might change as we go into more like a Series B.
Yeah.
But we've definitely been given a gift, I think, to have different kind of money that has a different intention, so that we can set really good foundations, including our data policies, including how we want to productize this. And we've even been talking, this is not a decision we've come to yet, but I like the thinking around it as a team, and with a few of our kind of strategic partners and these guys actually that are giving us the non-dilutive grant. We've been talking about actually separating the commercial entity and like a research foundation into. So basically that would mean that the research foundation doesn't have to only prioritize the commercial outputs of the product, because there's so many applications for what our data can communicate, especially from a research perspective. Like there's people, for example, that are doing research on the reduction of Alzheimer's correlated to physical touch. Now that's something that I never would have commercialized necessarily, but there's this amazing research capability and so many others, that I could spend the next 30 minutes listing, that I want to make sure that we have enough of a democratized kind of structure that we can drive some of these innovations in these verticals that might not be commercially interesting to us. So I think that could be a very interesting path to actually have the research done through a foundation, like a nonprofit, and then the commercial organization is the product and the way that we commercialize the product of InTruth.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I see this, I mean, the small example I have is I see this just even, using, whether it's using, because there's a few different vehicles for people to use as the actual wearable, right? Like the wearable partnership you have now, is it a main partnership with BioStrap? Is it BioStrap? Yeah. So there's that piece. And again, in beta still right now, it is not available yet, but in 2025 early-ish.
People can we're taking, so basically we're running our testing right now in cohorts. So if you go to intruth.io/beta, you'll be called at some point into our testing cycle, but that will become a full public beta. Yeah, probably in the next 3 months.
Yeah, so exciting. But yeah, the correlation I have is just like, I'm doing like a little overnight trip this week because, believe it or not, there has not been a deep dive of real research on clinically diagnosed vets with PTSD and cold, for example. And so I'm flying out to go and work in the development of the ice bath protocols so that these vets can try them for mental, because although we just had this big, I think it's a senator that spoke on behalf of saying, hey, I want to get more cold therapy into these veteran establishments, which is that's a big step. Many of these organizations are not, they're like, we need a piece of research. We got to have something on paper that shows that this is changing. And so a non-for-profit organization and a cold therapy company and all that are getting together to do that work. And I just think that this place where we have the ability to have a biofeedback device and InTruth and all of that, it's yet another huge sect of people, whether it's dealing with PTSD, sexual trauma, veterans for sure. And then also like the greatest, that we've overused the word pandemic to death now, but I still have this really strong belief as I watch and work with clients, as I feel into my own life changes and big things happening, that the biggest pandemic we have is this like epidemic of anxiety and loneliness and depression. And really it all comes from this. What I love about your platform is you're like, everything that's happening is either like it's a pull or a push off of this desire for love and connection. And so the anxiety and the fear and the stories and all of that. So I just wonder if there are other groups that you think will be, that specifically you want to mention or talk about, that will really, benefit from this. Because I know, I like how you're like, hey, we don't want to tell you what the interventions are, right? There are plenty of companies to probably do that. And to each person and each population type, there's going to be different interventions. But I wonder, it's like a limitless possibility, I guess, is going to be your answer.
No, there's specifics. I mean, of course, because we've got a path to market, right? So I believe that every amazing kind of tech company focused in part, at least, on developing a consumer product that everyone wants to use. So I think I want InTruth to become, the iPhone in that sense. I want it to be a consumer product that everyone loves. On, I guess, more like a B2B vertical application, the three ones that are immediate foresight are first responders, including veterans, mental health, and enterprise, so team performance. It'll also then go into things like athletes, other API integrations that we get asked about all the time, like, dating apps. It's obviously less interesting from an impact point of view, but it's something that comes up a lot. But for first
People are like, but
responders,
you're talking about love, Nick. Come on,
I
let's
know, I
integrate into
know.
the dating apps. I don't know if I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of integration. Although maybe, right? It's just like, here you go. You guys are a match.
Compatible. Your nervous systems are compatible. You won't trigger each other. Yeah. Or,
Yeah,
there's a lot to learn with this person. Yeah, I don't know. Like that would be interesting. I mean, I gave a keynote and showed me and my girlfriend's data the other day, and it was amazing because our data actually has started to mirror each other, and what it's showing is like co-regulation.
co-regulation. Ah,
Yeah, we're actually seeing that, and so the talk I gave was specifically on diversity in teams. So rather than like preaching about diversity, I said this is what we're seeing in our data. Like people's nervous systems actually start to match. So if you start with a team that all think the same, look the same, act the same, basically you're just going to get a very predictable outcome. But if you bring 20 people together that all have very different temperaments, they're actually going to regulate into a mean average of each other.
yeah.
And it was just a very kind of unique way of exploring this idea of diversity, and it was really cool to see the response because I think it landed for people in a different way. So that was very fun. But so the first responder application, they're going to use the data basically to more effectively intervene with crisis and understand how crisis has had an impact on the first responders. And eventually the data, we believe, will start to show patterns with things like PTSD, burnout, especially with things like burnout, which, there's no clinical diagnosis right now, right? So I think for people that are experiencing burnout or adrenal fatigue, it's just this like horrible thing. Same with menopause, like there's no biomarkers. So I feel like we can start to plug in the gaps of where the health system is not currently able to really get meaningful insight or even validate a lot of these things, which is really cool. And then the mental health side, which I'm obviously very personally passionate about. I mean, just before this podcast, I had a meeting with this amazing company, Mind Vector or Brain Vector, sorry, and they create like VR AI simulations of memories, basically, to help trauma recovery. It's very amazing. It's made me emotional watching one of the testimonials from one of the people that had been through the process. So obviously that has application in very deep trauma. A kind of lighter example would be they just worked with an Olympian that got back from Paris who didn't win, and he just wanted to like basically quit, and they put him through the simulation. And basically it was his father telling him, I'm so proud of you. Life's more than just a medal. Basically this intimate experience he got to have with his dad, which then for the first time, apparently he said, this is the first time since coming home that I've actually wanted to train for 2028, which I just think is amazing. So you think about the way InTruth can partner with a company like that inside trauma recovery and mental health. I think what's starting to emerge is something very, very, very innovative in terms of, mental health recovery and trauma therapy and these layers of trauma that kind of, standard CBT, we know this is never gonna get there. I think we can start to go that little bit deeper and actually see what moves the needle through the data. And then of course you can use it in truth like a practitioner aid. So rather than spending 30 minutes of your session trying to recount the week, you could just get your therapist to look at your data and say, hey, you were triggered on Tuesday at 10, you were with your mom, let's talk about that.
Yeah, beautiful. There's so many applications. This is such a fierce innovation of technology. I've like watched you kind of climb through the ropes on all of this, just on social and getting a chance to speak to you here and there about it. It feels so, all the things. I asked some people like, hey, what's the one thing you'd want to ask Nick, and a lot of the feedback because remembering I have a female audience, right? It's like, what would you want to ask about this space? And I almost want to deflect the question, but maybe it's something you want to speak briefly about because there was a post you did about it as well, which is like how it feels to be like a female founder pushing the edges of innovation like this, like with the background that you have. And I sort of don't love this is the world that we live in, right? We come in a package, we come in, and that, I think that comes from a place of like women that are entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, passion players that are really leaning in and having, challenges in that space. And so I don't know if there's anything you want to speak to in that regard. I think, we all got to show up armed for what we're armed for. And, but I'd just love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's important, like I'm the same in essence. I believe that we're born with the hand of cards that we're dealt, and you got to learn how to play it because there's no point fighting it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the venture space, the discrepancy is, it's so real. It's like 2 years ago, I think it was 0.8% of venture went to women. So we're not talking like a 60-40 or even 30-70 ratio. It's like, it's a very obvious bias that exists in that world. And then, on top of that, tech in particular, obviously engineering is very dominant. Tech generally, you've got the stereotype of the tech bro. It is.
I'm going to interrupt you really quickly. Just this one thing, I just sat and watched a panel where the panel was having a conversation about VCs, that women will go in to raise capital, raise funds, and men will go in. And the questions that the men quite often get asked are like,
the women are negatively geared.
Yeah. Like the men are like asked, like, well, walk me through the future plan, like how are you going to scale? And then like, it's like, oh, what about this roadblock? What about this roadblock? Have you thought about overcoming this obstacle? How are you going to handle that? Like that is wild to me. What did you say it's called? Negatively?
It's a negative gearing. So women are constantly getting asked questions that will make them be on the defense, and it is a very, very, very real thing. And we could go into, I actually think that this conversation is very nuanced. In a way, it should be its own podcast because...
Yeah, for sure. I think I was just looking for sort of a couple of your unique perspectives on navigating it.
I'm passionate about it. That's why I don't want to give like some trivial answer, because I think that it's a nuanced conversation, and I don't hear people have it in a nuanced way, and that's upsetting to me. And so I don't want to contribute to that problem. I know we can't have that full conversation on this podcast.
Yeah, maybe it's a part two.
Yeah. But it's a real thing, because we need the feminine perspective in technology. Like, it's as simple as that, especially as AI evolves. Like, we can't just have a representative subset of the population within that learning and that bias. That's very problematic for a whole series of reasons. As a woman wanting to take that on, I think you do have to have a willingness to stretch beyond maybe what is, innately natural, because you're playing in highly competitive markets. So I wish I could say I've found the perfect solution to never leave, my femininity in this game. And that's just bullshit. Like my way of coping in it has been, to just accept that and be willing to be whoever I have to be to get the job done. And that's not gonna suit, every woman. And I want to sort of respect that, because it is, I think it does come at a cost, for sure. And I think we can talk about the niceties and what needs to change, but there's going to be a reality in that, I think, for a while, because for everything, for every negotiation you're not willing to be bullish in, there's 1,000 men that are. So there's an unfair advantage there, for sure. I've tried to build a team around me that are all very good people, and who I can leverage the skill sets of. I try to keep everything very focused on the problem we're solving and how we're solving it and why that makes the most commercial sense, and try not to go into identity politics. And if I can see that emerges, I just kind of put it in the box of they're not the right investor for me.
Yeah.
I think that there are some basic negotiation skills you can learn, that give you back the power. And I know how exhausting it is. Just even this morning, I've pitched 3 times. I'm so sick of hearing myself pitch, but every time you have to do it with the same enthusiasm, the same patience, the same, but instead of doing the same pitch every time, I try to analyze, how can I improve the way that I position this? Maybe not the pitch itself, but am I allowing them to actually take the power in the meeting, or am I holding the power in the meeting? And I love the book 48 Laws of Power. I think he just, Robert Greene just nails it. And I think women are kind of more prone to wanting to deny that power dynamics are real. But part of the premise he puts forward is, everything is a power dynamic, and you can either accept that or not. But if you don't, basically you're going to be played your whole life.
Yeah.
So there are some basic skills that I think societally it's harder for women to learn and be exposed to them. But that's education. You can educate yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Beautiful. I always close with 2 questions. The first one is related to sort of the space of biohacking. And if you're not able to answer by saying, I'm going to use InTruth to do that, do you have a thing that it's either like early morning rise or during your day, or a specific kind of biohack, health optimization tool or tactic you use right now that, is lighting you up?
Just getting my heart rate up really high every day. like 170 at least for a few minutes. I think because I do so much mental work, the days that I prioritize that, I just have generally better well-being, and I think it takes that level of intensity maybe to get me out of my thinking mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then all the things that I think we all know, like sunlight's a really big thing. That's why I've extended my stay in Australia right now, because it's summer here.
Yeah.
It's about to be summer, and it just makes me feel better, being near the ocean, clean water. If I was to give advice to like make one change, especially if you're living in the States, just find really, really clean water.
Yeah. Yeah. That's brilliant advice for sure. For sure. And then before I ask you the last question, I will just let and remind all the audience who has not seen yet and will be hearing about it, that we will be graced with your presence in person in the end of February at the Sherpa Breath and Cold in the Wild retreat. And we're going to have you keynote and share. And I think both of our dreams is that we can, get biofeedback on everyone who's there.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's track your We did that. We did that at our last retreat. It was awesome. So I'd love to do that. Like everyone wore a bio strap, and we looked at the changes throughout the retreat.
Yeah. So I'm highly enthusiastic about that, and so thankful that you're coming. It's an epic time. The whole thing is an epic time. Sunshine, wilderness, colds, breath, sauna, all the things. And just amazing people. And everyone talked about the food last year. I was like, hey, we just had an amazing time. They're like, the food. So people have to come and check it out. And that's like sherpabreathandcold.com in the Wild Retreat. And you will be there, and your glorious videos are on the page. It's great. And the last thing I always ask is if you could go back to your teenage self now and say, hey, Nick, don't miss this thing. This is the one piece of advice that's going to help you sort of live into your well-being, stand in your power, feel more whole as a human. And I'm giving you this little whisper in the ear right now to make sure that this is not a pitfall. What would that thing be? That piece of advice.
Probably it doesn't matter how high you jump, you'll never ever be enough for someone else unless you are enough for you.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Thanks so much, sweet sister, for being on this call with me and sharing your story. And I will link all of the things. And if people want to like dive in right away, what's the best website or portal for them to go to check it out?
Yeah, so I mentioned intruth.io is our tech website, and then maybe for your community, actually, we have a community which is on School, so it's skool.com/institute, like InTruth Institute. And I have a community of amazing, just a couple hundred incredible founders, design thinkers, people that are very interested in system change. And it's kind of a digital home for everything that we do as a company as well.
Amazing. So that's School.
Yep.
School.com.
Yep. But skool.
Yep.
.com/institute.
Amazing. Great.
Yeah.
I'm sure that people will be leaning in and looking you up, and I cannot wait to all be together and to lean even more into InTruth and all the beautiful work you're doing with Love Out Loud. So keep it up.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.